I mean, welcome everybody. I'm really pleased to hang out with you all and glad something tweaked your interest. That's great. So I'm not proposing a lot. Like I'm going to give you some of my reflections on why I proposed this activity today, and we can do with it as we wish. So there's not like a ton of structure here. So what I'm going to do is just like say a couple of things about me. Would you like to hear like introductions from each other? I mean, I don't know, maybe you all know each other super duper well, but I don't. So, how about you say your name? I mean, if you're able, like if you're in a public place and the noise thing is not kind of, yeah, sure. Um, if you have to go off camera or you can't do the sound or whatever, fine. Do what you can do. So like your name, and help us out if the pronunciation is something that people are typically not kind of getting right. Let's see. Something about your context, like if that's your geographical context or institutional or something. And then like also like a sentence maybe about how you connect to the topic. So that is like kind of the emotional consequences of doing the work you do, the work we do, or a point of curiosity about it. Like you may have been pulled to come to this because of like you have a particular kind of tricky thing you're dealing with or something like that. Okay, so your name, something about that gives us some context about you, and then like kind of something you're offering or wanting or both out of being here today. So maybe I'll go first just to give people like whatever. So my name is Ellen Russell. So I'm currently located in Canada, actually the traditional territories of the Neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee people. So I am institutionally, like right now I'm an academic, but for many years I worked at a place called the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, which is not precisely a CERN kind of a group, but it has some overlap, and certainly some of the work I did there would be, I guess you could say, creating conditions of existence for other more alternative paths. But I found it to be pretty emotionally consequential to do that work in that forum, also in my current forum, and for reasons that I'm kind of going to get to in a minute. But it didn't seem to me like there was much space to acknowledge that. We were kind of always in the fight, and then people would burn out and that would be it. And like I really felt like I don't really feel like this is the most sustainable kind of game plan. So I have long since been thinking about like I want to do this work, but I don't want it to be something that is so well, or it is challenging. So like how do we manage that? Let me say it that way. Okay, so other folks wanting to introduce yourselves in whatever way feels okay for you, given your current circumstance and whatever it is you want to get out of this. Should I just call it like Nadia? Would you do next?
Okay, I'm Nadia Ihanisova. I'm live in the Czech Republic, and I'm based at Masaryk University, where I'm slowly at the moment. I will soon be actually retired, but so far I'm still here at the university. And actually, I found the topic unusual, sort of the feelings and the fears, and then thinking about it, I realized that lately we have had some difficulties here as the team, not concerned primarily with community economics, but with critique of mainstream economics and with degrowth. There have been sort of reactions from the leadership of our department as regards seeing us as maybe too left, too much to the left, or too much, or maybe somehow connected with communism or something like that. So there have been some sort of strange, and also there's a very strange newspaper which now has been criticizing degrowth people from a rather people trying to speak about degrowth publicly from a strange angle. It's not a it's not a respected newsletter or newspaper, but it's disquieting to see that suddenly we are being sort of targeted both publicly and also a little bit in the department after long years when all was okay. So I just thought that it might be interesting for me to see if to see more if other people maybe have some problems which are not really academic but have to do with emotions or some attacks or things like that. Not sure if I made myself so clear.
Yeah, perfectly. Thanks, Nadia. Cassidy, is this a good moment for you, given that you're mobile or what have you?
Yeah. Sure. Thanks, Ellen, and thanks, Nadia. My name's Cassidy Taz Garcia. I'm based in the United States, in New Mexico, on the traditional lands of the Tiwa and Tewa people. But today I'm actually on the East Coast of the US, in Northampton, Massachusetts. I'm visiting my little sister who goes to Smith College. So I'm a PhD candidate in the geography department at UNM. And my research is on how informal economies and collective care work as a mechanism of disaster response with climate disaster. Specifically, my dissertation is about the largest wildfire in New Mexico state history, which happened in 2022. And there's many kind of like imbricated layers of cultural dynamics and place-based knowledges, as well as bureaucracy failure that are playing into the recovery efforts of that fire. And it's still a very ongoing emergency, even though it happened 2 years ago. Every time it rains, there's flooding because the soil was burned so badly that it's essentially can't hold any water. It's hydrophobic. And so there's this whole other layer of now like living in a state of emergency that community is having to manage. It's a pretty rural area. And there's some really specific aspects of what could be thought of as commoning in terms of historic use of commoning of lands and water resources that are playing into how people are conceptualizing caring for themselves and each other and their neighbors. So that's my dissertation work. I'm also interested in this topic, especially given the US elections that happened this week. I think this is a good time to be talking about and thinking through fear and community economies and trying to like read for difference in our culture and society as a whole as we move into this next 4 years of politics in my country. So I'm happy to be here, and I will be listening, but I have to go walk to another location, so I'll probably turn off my camera after we do introductions. Thank you. I'll call on, how about Emily next?
Sure. Thanks, Cassidy and everyone. And I think this is a good segue. So my name's Emily Melvin. I'm located in rural Eastern North Carolina. I'm at the Duke University Marine Lab. So I'm not on main campus. I'm in a rural area on the coast in the land of the Lumbee and Nusiak people. And my work is in the Bahamas, and I think about how we might redefine. I'm a PhD candidate in marine science and conservation, and I'm particularly interested in thinking about how we might redefine the blue economy in a more community, using a community economies lens. But the reason I was really interested in today's topic, and I think I share this with Cassidy, is the fear coming out of this week's election, and in particular, where I'm at, a lot of the signage was about Kamala Harris being communist, and we saw in some of the post election polling that one of the top issues was fear of losing democracy, and I think people thought that was going in the left direction, and it actually went in the right direction because there's a fear of communism. So thinking about how to continue to do this work when, there's this kind of binary notion in our society about communism, socialism versus democracy, when really that's not the case, and thinking about how we navigate that in our work, particularly knowing that some of us in the States are probably going to be increasingly challenged to get things like funding for our work. So.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate that, Emily. Somebody else, do you want to go next?
I'm sorry, Did you ask me to
Would
go
you
on?
don't, yeah, would
Yeah,
you
I
introduce
can.
yourself?
Yeah, sure. I didn't properly hear it, whether you said Boris or someone. So, well, I can do it because I think I'm. No, there's Octavia also missing. So anyway, my name is Boris. I'm from Poland, but I'm doing PhD in economic geography in central Italy in a very small city. And now I'm in Paris during a visiting stay here. It's Science Po. I've been economist by training and a sort of a neoliberal consultant by profession for a while. I worked for one of the biggest consulting companies for a couple of years, but I never really liked it. And then I switched to urban planning and economic geography and these topics. And I'm researching right now, or I just finished researching rural postal offices and Italian villages which have been affected by an earthquake. And my research was about redescribing them with the language of social infrastructure and the emotional and caring work they do, instead of the mainstream economic discourse of them being nodes of postal network which generate costs or profits. And what brought me to this session? Well, I have to say that it is at my very core of my current, I would say, identity, the issue what to do with the economics, mainstream economic discourse, and how difficult it is, because my research has been oftentimes called partisan or just a story. And or then I came here to Paris and I was shouted at that I cannot use these epistemologies because it is not theory. You cannot collapse theory with practice, with everyday practices, for example. So it's never been easy, but so far it's been, well, it's interesting, but it's rough. So I'm curious to learn about your experiences, your ideas about how to go forward. And I think, Octavia, you were the last one, if you can introduce yourself.
Thank you. There is Ligia still, but I don't know if you can introduce yourself in the library, but I can go and then so you see if you, yeah. Great. So, hi everybody. I'm Ottavia. I'm based in Switzerland, and so I'm here also, I mean, as a participant, but also as a CEI liaison. So, which means that I am taking notes of the conversation and sharing them with the organizers of Liviana. And so at times I might be a bit distracted because I try to take notes and follow the discussion. So but I'm also here, of course, because I'm interested in the topic. My research has touched several things, but mainly reflections on the construction of notions of economic success, previously in Central Asia, and especially on the topic of agricultural cooperatives, and all the construction of what is a successful cooperative in a context that experienced state socialism, with also a notion of socialist cooperatives, of course, and later then with the privatization and establishment of other kinds of cooperatives. And then later I also did research here in Switzerland about industrial town and industrial development in small towns in Switzerland, and they're also looking at different visions and representations of what people here in Switzerland, I mean citizens and city dwellers, imagine as desirable manufacture activities in their cities. And I think there is a lot of that resonates, and maybe also like in this specific moment personally, I think the whole affective and emotional side of life, but also research and academic life is also quite important for me. And it's also, like a source of a lot of reflections and thoughts. There are, of course, the issues that you mentioned about the US elections, but of course, not only, I mean, also a lot of political developments here in Europe and in other parts of the world that are very worrying. And also here in Switzerland, we just had a discussion the other day, some months afterwards, but we had like really, let's say, difficult discussions after the attacks in Israel in so the last October, or like, yeah, 1 year ago. And then with the whole occupation, pro-Palestine demonstrations and so on. And in the university, there was really a lot of repression also. And there were, and of course, the affective side played a big role because there was a lot of fear, a lot of frustrations and so on. And we just had this discussion, like looking back at what happened and also about so it was also said by somebody, like the role of universities. So in the public debate, in like explaining or defending some specific epistemologies that might not be mainstream in the public discourse and so on, and how all this affects us and others affectively. So yeah, just some thoughts. And Lydia, yeah, you said something in the chat. Okay, so you can introduce yourself. Like
I can read.
not
There's a
loudly.
lot of people, and as long as I don't speak
Great.
too loud. So I'm studying at PhD student at the Estonian Art Academy, but I'm also studied economics before this. So yeah, basically that's why I ended up here. But also I'm involved in several collectives in Portugal. I'm Portuguese, and we spoke about this fear like in society, but I'm also interested in understanding the emotional dynamics inside collectives and in relation to the community projects we develop. It's very interesting because when you have this collective, which has a bit more organic, of course, it's also pretty much, we have all these emotional dynamics happening and people bring in, of course, also their fears, their insecurities, and their there's a lot of this happening. And I was thinking also what happened this year, that we usually use these community economies, like we usually don't use a lot of money. It's a lot of trade, a lot of shared and common resources. But this year we got funding and we had to have more decentralized finance, and also we had to commit temporarily in a very different way because we had like this 2-year project. And I started to experience on a personal aspect a lot of fear. I was thinking, oh my God, if something goes wrong, who takes the responsibility? Because we are horizontal collective and informal. So it was also interesting to experience like how when you change the format or the economy that you are using, it has different impact also in your emotion. And I think, yeah, I didn't think about this before. But of course, also I'm interested in the other aspect on how through the community economies can we also reduce fear in society? How can we create also safer or more sustainable environment for communities?
Okay, thank you for everybody for like getting us started this way. It's really important for me to kind of get a little taste of where you're at. So I'm thinking about starting this with a little story, and then I have like kind of some remarks which are basically kind of general, but like I kind of think of this in 2 buckets, like kind of what this is like for me or anyone as a researcher or an activist who is going to communities to, propel some kind of action. And also what it is like for the participants that we engage with who are, entertaining the possibility of this action. Okay, so that's how I'm dividing my mind. It just helps me grasp things a little bit. So my story. This is a while back, but it was while I was with this Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, where we were advocating on behalf of, kind of, I would call them mild reforms, frankly, but, we were really trying to, because we thought this was a step towards something. And we did get in front of parliamentary committees in Canada. So this is where, in a way, this dynamic was distilled for me because it was so overt. So it was like, in that situation, it was like, well, our panel today consists of Dr. So-and-so, who is from the bank of such and such and has like 5 Nobel Prizes and is a recognized authority and so forth, right? And then we have Ellen, who is like kind of a left-wing crank, but for balance sake, we have her here, right? Like, now, nobody said it as extremely as I am, but the undertone was unmistakable. And throughout the next hour or two, there were all of these little references that position what I said as kind of naive or ridiculous or sort of like, isn't she sweet? And what he said was like, well, indeed, we would be well advised to listen to this senior statesman who really knows what's going on out there. You know, I mean, nobody can say that to me. But I left with this, and for a while, it took me a while to sort of parse what I felt I was experiencing, because without a direct attack, I didn't know why I felt so sort of discredited and ridiculous and all of that. Okay, so that really stuck with me. Like, I realized that the emotional toll that took on me was significant, and I have some resources to sort of support myself through that. But, you know, on my better days, I cope with that, but not every day is your better day, you know? So it was like, if this is happening to me, and I actually had an institutional location, which gave me something like credibility or whatever, what is it to just be in communities and have this coming at you? So I wanted to say a couple of things by way of introduction, and then, you know, like, which obviously relate to that experience. So, you know, many years ago, actually, I knew Julie Graham, and, you know, I'm reading their stuff, and it's like, oh, like, so there is some way to address this perception that nothing exists except capitalism, or nothing exists except what we say exists, i.e. the hegemonic discourse of, like, you know, if you think there's alternatives, like, you're either, you know, like, charitably misled, uncharitably crazy. So all of the CERN work since that has done the case studies about, you know, what's feasible, has done the analysis about kind of the things that we have not been able to recognize as being aspects of alternatives that are already in play, the stuff that people have done to actually go out and initiate things that they then explore in terms of understanding, you know, what works and doesn't work. All of that kind of stuff is rendered, like, can be discredited not based on the evidence, but based on pulling on this hegemonic perception that it cannot be, and therefore whatever it is you think you're researching is not actually happening, or doesn't matter, or is so completely niche that, like, we can't learn anything from that. You know what I mean? Like, there are various ways of discrediting it, but I'll lump it all together in discrediting. So it's, first of all, as a person who is being, I'll call it, attacked with this, what you say is impossible kind of rhetoric. I mean, you have to kind of handle the personal consequences of being basically identified as that which is not sane, that which is not possible, that which is not, you know, helpful. And furthermore, the critics who are using that approach can also claim that you are, in a sense, hurting the communities you profess to help, because you are advocating that they waste time on the impossible instead of, like, just getting with the program and doing the usual stuff to fit into, you know, the inevitability of capitalism in its very micro dimensions and macro dimensions. So the to the extent that that discrediting works, it preempts whatever other work we do, right? There's no point in looking at your case study or your article or whatever, because you are exploring a fantasy. You know, so in Lacanian terminology, this is foreclosed. Like, we cannot think about that which has been deemed impossible. So why are we even talking about this, right? I mean, like, so the pathology isn't capitalism. The pathology is the critics of capitalism. So you've got the world is upside down, right? You've got the US elections, right? I mean, the enemies of democracy are the people who are like trying to actually count votes. And the proponents of democracy are the people who are loading up the, you know, local voting machinery so that they get their desired results, right? I mean, we're absolutely upside down in terms of, like, if you like democracy, you should be with Trump, clearly, because he's the guy who's like protecting you. And the other people are, you know, bad, crazy, stupid, right? That's used as well. Right. So, I mean, apart from strategizing on how to work out there with that, how to work in here with that, because it takes a lot to be called these bad names, right? And still persevere. Yeah, I kind of said all that. That is like the, I would say, how I see the dilemma for us as researchers, activists, and what have you. But there is also the associated dilemma to people who maybe don't position themselves as what we do, but as, like, I went to this community meeting because I thought I might try this thing. And I walk in there and there's Ellen Russell telling me about this or that alternative. And I feel like if I listen to Ellen Russell about this or that alternative, that associates me with the people who, or the ideas that, or the organizations that are not credible, proposing things that are not feasible, that are potentially even misleading me towards the, you know, insert bad word, right? Communism, whatever. So that's consequential for them too. I have to think not only about my own position walking into the room, but the position of the people who might otherwise be kind of intrigued or curious, but fear that they're going to go home and tell their friends and they're going to say, oh, you went to that cult or what have you, right? Insert bad word here. I have a lot of bad words. I'll just circulate through them, but you know them. Okay, so that is my concern of the day. And I'm proposing that we kind of like deal with the two buckets. Like, first, our situation as the people who walk in with the ideas or cooperate in generating the ideas. I don't mean to say it's necessarily a top-down thing, but I'm just imagining a situation which, for whatever reason, we are understood as the bearer of some alternative economic something. And then the second bucket of, like, what it is to dare to entertain that alternative economic something or another. Okay, so let's start with us. In whatever the various work is that we've done or wish to do, or even the work we have, like the ways in which we've experienced this in cooperation with others, because many times we're not just sort of alone speaking about this, right? This is, you know, we do our various coalition and things that, you know, within our cooperatives or something like that, where many of us are, you know, coming with similar ideas. So how do we manage that discrediting, the emotional entailments of that discrediting, et cetera stuff? Now, I kind of get that. I mean, many people, I've had this conversation a lot, and many people say, well, you know, self-care. And I absolutely, you know, I'm down with that. Like, you cannot burn yourself out, like exhausting. Like, there's only 24 hours a day, people, and we got to deal with that. But I don't find that to be as necessary it is. I don't find it sufficient. So I'm just wondering, first of all, are you all with me? Does this seem like a fruitful avenue for you? Or, yeah, can you contribute in some way so I kind of get my head to where your head is at? Emily, please.
Yeah, so I will say I don't have a good answer to how to deal with it, because I am personally currently in a very high emotion space. This week was
Mhm.
very difficult for me. Perhaps it was naivety, but I honestly didn't expect this outcome. From the election, I've been in my bubble. But to me, my concern is it goes beyond even the notion. I can deal with people thinking that I'm silly or unserious or not to be taken seriously. That doesn't bother me as much as the discourse that I'm an active threat because I'm Marxist or communist. So to me, it's not so much the critique of you're too idealist, you're unrealistic, as some of the things, not so much in my actual work, but when I try to explain my work to other people who fundamentally misunderstand Marxism, for one thing, because I'm absolutely not a Marxist. But you know, that kind of reactionary, that I'm not just silly, that I am an active threat to our economic system, when I believe that the people who have been voting on things like who voted for Trump because of things like prices were too high and things like that, that those are fundamental problems with capitalism, not either party. And I actually don't think either party was going to solve them adequately. But then my ideas become somehow threatening. And that's where my fear lies. And so that's why I don't have a great response of how to deal with it right now, because I feel like I'm really in the middle of it. But yeah, I think that's, for me, the fear is like being posed as an active threat. You know, if people think I'm idealist and, you know, that I can deal with. It's the fear of when people think I'm, you know, actively undermining something that I think is actually the thing that's harming people directly, if that makes sense.
Maybe
Yeah, no, very interesting. And
if I can just add super quickly, so that, I mean, I think it's super important that we also discuss about the US elections and so on. And I'm really like, I also need that. But just to give another example of the kind of narrative of threads, what I was saying about all the discussion about Israel and Palestine is also like anti-Semitism, right? So people who were doing post-colonial studies and studying settler colonialism in Palestine, they were like labeled as anti-Semitists, right? So that would be a bit the same. Yeah, I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, and I do think it's a global problem. I don't think we should focus solely on, you know, I recognize, but it's just, that's where I'm in the space, but I think we have a lot of, it's a global concern for sure. It is not, what happened this week is one example of what I think is happening globally and how we deal with that and how we come together across these political boundaries and across, you know, internationally to deal with this and combat it when it really is such a global problem.
anybody else want to jump in?
Well, maybe just to say that yes, the Palestine problem is very, very important here as well. Our head of the faculty is very pro-Israel, and the students recently had a demonstration for Palestine. But essentially, most academics are just, nobody knows what's really happening in Gaza because the media aren't covering it at all. And I'm feeling very, very frustrated about the whole thing. So this is another part of the package really, which has come in recently. So suddenly I'm in this world full of, full of strange events, full of something, because before somehow I didn't feel these issues so strongly, but now suddenly there are several issues, including Trump, which make me afraid, notwithstanding what is happening at our department, even on the macro level.
This is Cassidy.
Anybody
Is it
else?
okay if I jump in and talk and
Yes,
not use my
please.
camera? Okay. Thank you everyone for your shares. I relate so much to all of them. Something that's been coming up for me is I am a geographer. I participate in AAG, for those that don't know, the American Association of Geographers, and our annual conference. And I have noticed that there's lots of calls that go out before the conference for session participation, and there's been a lot of calls from students for conversations regarding Palestine, but there's been no commentary from AG as an entity about anything. And there is a student-led political ecology group. It's going to have like a day before the conference, kind of like Palestine teach-in, but I guess I'm just interested and also like have fear myself of like, I care a lot about standing with my ethics and showing my activism, but then I'm also like on the job market, and how does that balance with like needing to find employment within this like power hierarchy of academia, but also wanting to just maintain my I don't know, my belief system and ethics. So that's something that I'm personally managing and battling at this moment. Thanks.
Anybody else feel like they
Yeah,
want
can I jump in for?
Please.
So I'm not going to comment on Palestine because I don't have too much to say on top of what Ottavia said, and especially Ilian Papa comes to my mind when you spoke of people who are critical historians of this conflict, and then they are labeled the way you said they are labeled. But I was thinking about, well, the broader topic of ours today, and at least I have come up with kind of 3 strategies. But one is about, like, when you speak from the position of difference, and then you trigger sort of libidinal, and kind of emotional responses from your fellow, let's say, academics, who in my case are mainly economists. So they have very strong emotional investments in their convictions, and what's problematic for me is that they don't have what a good academic, in my opinion, should have: an open mind to discuss different vocabularies, to discuss different languages of speaking about things. So it's not there, and this is a pity. And then how you deal with the consequences of this, and there I would say I think of those consequences on 2 levels. One is your institutional survival. So how do you go ahead with your job or publishing or whatnot? So then you simply have a bit of limited options. You be looking for places which are open to your type of scholarship. But then there is a sort of a personal, like, what do you do with this personally? And I had a strategy, sort of an accidental strategy in the end, of disempowering the places of authority by learning them. So I studied neoclassical economics in a good university, and it doesn't impress me anymore. I worked for 5 years in consulting, which is also a source of authority, and it doesn't impress me anymore, because when you see it from the inside, it's really not what it presents itself on the outside. So when I have an angry economist shouting at me and saying that this is partisan research, I'm a bit annoyed because it seems like a waste of time, but personally, somehow I can handle this. What helps is also looking for similar communities, like community here, Community Economies Institute, or there's, at least in Poland, there's a very nice foundation called Kalecki Foundation, Canadian Economics, whatnot, but they have a very nice motto or claim that they are destroying neoclassical. It's a creative destruction of neoclassical economics, which is sort of a pun on Schumpeterian economics. It's very nice. So anyway, there are some sources, some communities where you can find, let's say, support coming from like similar experiences, almost like this meeting. But what I'm worried about is this institutional survival, and how the academia is not really as open-minded as it, I think, could be or should be. Yeah, so that will be my couple of points.
Anyone else feel moved to speak at the moment?
Actually, I could add on top of that. So I think we spoke about fear connected, in general, connected to power, or this kind of silencing. Fear connected to uncertainty as well. And then now you spoke about survival also, like maybe connected to this uncertainty. How do we keep going? Let's say. Yeah, I would maybe with our collectives, which are not taken very seriously, we just keep going, and then after maybe a couple years and a few thousands of people collaborating with us, maybe we are not so insignificant anymore. So it's also by taking the time and engaging, finding ways to engage that people are not as threatening and people don't realize they are engaging. So we use a lot this strategy. By using, for instance, art, we invite people to draw different people, and suddenly you are engaging in a topic which is political and you didn't even realize it. So we use a lot this soft approach. Yeah, I think we are secret agents trying to, how to say, blur a bit these polarities that exist in this society at the moment.
I just want to raise one last point and stop hijacking the space about, you know, like on the one hand, how you stay open-minded and kind of receptive to different types of scholarship, and how you combine this with sort of strength of your convictions. Because that was the advice I got from my supervisor when my first PhD paper was labeled as partisan, and I was warned not to do this anymore by our committee. And then my external supervisor told me, well, the strengths of your convictions. So how do you remain? But then on the other hand, you have to be, you know, open-minded and receptive to different, I know, as I say, vocabularies. And just one example, like when I was researching those rural postal offices, and there are, you know, small villages of 100 people in the Italian mountains. And I'm just saying that this postal office is doing a very important job for them. And then I get questioned, but you know, those villages are going to die out and they're only old people. So why should we care? And it's then very difficult to move on, pick up such conversation, because there's no conversation then. And there, because we don't speak, I would say, the same. There's, yeah, I know languages, so that's yeah, difficult.
Emily, you wanted to join in?
Yeah, I think the language point is a really good one, and it's somewhere where I think we can think about strategies because, for example, I gave a presentation, there's a fisheries conference in the Bahamas, and I gave a presentation based on some kind of preliminary discourse analysis I had done, but the primary point of the presentation was actually to get people to work with me, like to say, here's what I'm interested in doing in the field. And I found that by reading for difference and by finding places of common language, that can be a strategy where maybe we can seem less threatening. So, like, for example, I don't use the word community economies when I go in there because community economies sounds like communism. I use the word diverse economies because that's a less, you know, that's a term that they're not as familiar with. And so when you're talking to people, and then you can find the language that they use that I think jives with the language that we use, things like I'm seeing things like wanting to promote community resilience, wanting to build local capacity. Those are all things that are in this discourse that we can pull out and say, this is where our work matters. And then by kind of, so I don't know if that's one specific strategy, is to try to find the language that we share, and then we can use in our circles, you know, we can be broader with our like really community economies focused language, but when we're speaking in public, because I'm working with I'm working in a place that has a very neoliberal development idea, and if I come in and just attack that, you know, I'm not going to make, but if I can find common ground, you know, for example, one of the projects I'm working on is a mangrove restoration project that they want to incorporate into carbon credits. And if I come in and just say carbon credits are bad, you shouldn't do that, that's not going to move anywhere. But if I say, well, let's think about if we can do a cooperative, you know, those are the kind of ideas that if I match their language, you know, so maybe that's one strategy, is like we use our reading for difference to find where we can find commonality in language with people who are kind of outside of our immediate circle.
Yeah, can I?
Go ahead, Nadia.
Yeah.
Please.
You reminded me of how for many years I've been critiquing the economic system in my courses, and I never used the word capitalism because here in Czech Republic that really brands you. I just used economic system, and nobody ever had a problem with that. And now the younger generation, the younger people are just saying capitalism, and even the students though. The students use capitalism themselves, so now I occasionally use it, and our ex-students who are part of this degrowth group also use capitalism openly, and they are drawing attacks. So it's true that the language is very important. At the same time, I think there's another dimension, and what Boris was speaking about was also something else, not the words we use or the concepts we try to introduce and the way we speak, but which is also very important. But there's also what Joan Martinez Alier, the ecological economist, has called languages of valuation. And I think that that is also what I come up against when you say these people don't matter. I had the same conversation years ago with a sort of neoliberal thinking guy when I said, look, these genetic resources are being guarded by small farmers who at the same time are threatened. And he said, well, these small farmers, they just have to go, they just have to disappear. And that was exactly when I found there was no way we could connect, because his language of valuation, his value, the world he lives in is just completely different. So that's a very difficult situation to bridge. I agree.
Anybody else for now? So I'm kind of struck with how I am comfortable with the language of strategy, right? Like in terms of like, how should I communicate about this idea in words that don't send up the flags that are discrediting? How might it connect with, ideas that are already out there so they seem legitimate or whatever, right? And I mean, I totally applaud this as an undertaking to like broaden the appeal and get past some of the sort of gatekeepers that people have kind of intellectually implanted that, I cannot talk about something called communism or capitalism that's just not allowed or whatever. But I suspect, like when we're not super successful, like they may let us play around the margins with a little bit of like fancy footwork with terminology and whatever, but when we are more successful, we get more attacked. And I'm really interested in how do we manage that stage? Like, I think as a group, we're pretty good at getting started, right? Like, there are a lot of people within CERN that are doing fantastic things, who have lots to say about how they started their first meeting or how they, published these materials and, all that, like who they made alliances with in their local communities, all of that, right? But if we actually get to the point where we start to matter to the mainstream, the gloves get off, in my experience. And that is where, like, I think it is, like, yes, we need to strategize about how we're going to conduct ourselves there, but I think it can be pretty emotionally consequential too for us. Like, they will go with, you're not really an economist. Actually, you are kind of enumerate, frankly. Actually, you are, I mean, you've heard this sort of stuff before, right? I mean, it escalates in terms of like how you get demonized up to the point of like the recent election rhetoric, right? That the opponent is what? Stupid, They pull on the racism, they pull on anything that is broadly discrediting to target at the person they're threatened by. This resonating for you folks? Like, I mean, that's where I at least have not performed optimally. Because if I'm getting a frontal assault about like what an idiot I am, more or less, like I mean, they get that gender-wise, that's going to get to me, right? I mean, they play it to whatever message they believe will get under your skin. So I have done the thing where like, okay, you think I'm an idiot? I'll give you so much math with this analysis that you're going to think, if you think math equals smart and I do math, then I'm smart. It didn't really help. I mean, it helps for some people who think, oh, math, wow, that's fabulous. But it doesn't really get to the point of like, they didn't care about what I said. They cared that I said it. And in that way, like I lacked sort of intellectual self-defense, because if literally my point of view is disqualifying, regardless of how I articulate it, I don't know how to handle that too well. I mean, except to have the thickest skin possible. Actually, Trump has sort of been an inspiration to me in the following way. He does not care if he's wrong or ridiculous, you know, or like any number of disconforming pieces of evidence are evident in public circulation, right? It matters not to that man. He's just going to do what he's going to do. And like, I lack that. I don't like, I mean, I think it is probably some sort of emotional deficit that allows that to happen. But I don't know how to like mobilize in that way. I just don't know how to do that. So I don't know. It's like, and now I think part of it is like communities help to like give us confirming messages, right? So that we are not just bad, idiotic, stupid people. But it's tough because our communities themselves are under similar attack, right? So how do I support the next person when I am also being, you know, subject to the same pressures? Anyhow, I don't know if that resonates for anybody, but like, I'm really trying to push us to the, like, the tough end of this problem, not the sort of like, hey, I can like change my language and I should be good to go. Please change your language, do whatever you think is strategic. But I suspect we will sooner or later come up, we're going to get pushback.
Well, just the Gandhi quote, you know, Gandhi from India, the quote comes to mind. He said something like, first they're gonna ignore you, then they're gonna laugh at you, then they're gonna attack you, and then you're gonna win with your ideas. So the attacking is really an indication that we begin to matter. So we can take it like that.
Yeah, no, I find that really helpful, really helpful. I just have to be able to withstand it. Like, because when everyone's attacking you, I mean, I mean, I'm not Trump. I feel it. Yeah, please.
Can
Katie,
I
go ahead.
jump in? I mean, for me, one question is also because it's everything. So it really resonates a lot with me, and I think it's not necessarily normal that it happens that we are attacked, and it happens that so we are labeled as threat, and so everything you said, and also that we are attacked personally, as you said, Ellen, now, and I think it's absolutely, I mean, so first thing, it's absolutely normal that it affects us emotionally. And I think the first thing to do is really like to acknowledge that, right? Because often also like when you write about, I mean, when you write scientific stuff, and also when we speak in conferences and so on, I mean, more and more it is acknowledged the affective side and the affective also consequences and toll on ourselves, but also not that much and also not all the time, right? So in these spaces like today, I think they are very precious, and also like with our colleagues in our universities, with our collective members and so on. So I think it's super important that this aspect is acknowledged and thought about and shared, and that already by sharing it, so I guess it's also kind of supporting you in going through these emotional states, actually. So now I lost what my second point that I wanted to say, but okay. But the second point is also that, I mean, a question for me is like, at one point, or at what point can we feel ourselves okay and legitimate to just stop for a while? You know what I mean? I mean, to give up the fight, you know? So, because the emotional toll is too high, right? So, and who also has the privilege to take that break somehow, or like to stop the fight for a moment, because it depends, of course, on your situation. But I mean, there are people that are more affected by the direct consequences of, I don't know, specific policies or specific discourses or whatever. And these people cannot, yeah, I mean, they don't have the privilege to really stop and take a moment to care for themselves and for their emotions. And in other positions, you can take this break, right? So, and then the question of when and how and who and why is allowed actually to take a break that can be healing actually for your, for your mental health, so to say. So that would be a question. I don't know if you have like also examples or moments where you just said, okay, I just step back for a moment because I have to take care of myself, and then afterwards I take up the fight again somehow. But this is of course like a matter of context and possibility and of privilege of like being able to do that.
Mhm. Anybody else want to step in there? I mean, I take serious your point. Like literally, if you're, in the midst of survival level crisis, this is not going to be the time where you think, I'm going to do therapy for a year and just like see what's going on here. Like it's just like, and in particular, and I mean, I get a salary. So, I mean, there are different consequences for me about like how my life will look as a result of decisions I make about how much to be engaged in important struggles. So again, another level of like, this is different. This is probably not a conversation that is resonant for people who are literally facing survival level challenges that require immediate action. Arguably, which is all of us if we're talking about climate change, but I guess I'm making some sort of a distinction in my mind between there is actually no tsunami headed my way so far as I can tell. So like I have a minute, but I might be wrong. And, perhaps I'm not understanding the gravity of the situation fully. So this is kind of assuming that we can take at least until, 2 hours out of our day to reflect on this. Anybody else have anything to link into that? Because
I
Yeah,
just
Boris, you
had
had
this
something?
kind of maybe I don't know whether I'll be able to express it properly, but I'll give it a try. So I was like, on the one hand, you can view it as a sort of a moral obligation of yours coming from whatever source, doesn't matter. It's the moral obligation you may feel, but to expect yourself to be heroic, I think it's good to let it go, not to require heroism from anyone. They are just mundane necessities that come knocking, and then if you have the opportunity to to heal, it's okay. Just this idea of heroism, I think it's good to give it up and do what can be done, but not more.
So I'm going to just share one little tactic that I have. Oh no, Cassidy, you please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just kind of thinking through everything that everyone's sharing, and every time someone shares, I'm like, oh, I relate to that so much, and it's offering a different perspective. But I would say that's something that I've been thinking through a lot. I participated in the Europe in-person node in Trondheim, Norway this past summer of the Community Economies school. And we had lots of conversations within our program, our 2-week program, about what was our role as activists. And one of the facilitators, Kevin St. Martin, who I respect so much, he made the argument like, I am an activist by being an academic. And that felt like so challenging to me. Like, I just, I can't say what's right for him, but for me, it doesn't feel that like just landing on that, like we're academics and producing research is our role of activism and that's enough. For me, that's not enough. And so I'm like kind of trying to parse through this feeling of like, I need to do more. I want to be engaged in my community beyond my activism work, which I am. I participate in mutual aid efforts where I live in New Mexico and different kind of food-based mutual aid projects. But I guess I'm kind of thinking through what everyone's sharing, and I'm wondering about like the use of our time as a resource and how potentially like putting all of our time towards a specific strategy might be more beneficial than trying to separate it out and trying to do so many things, which maybe relates a little bit to what Boris was saying about like not being hard on ourselves. There's only so much we can do. But then I also really heard Octavia when she was sharing that you know, there's certain people that don't have the privilege to be able to say, okay, I'm going to take a break right now. So I guess I don't have any answers. I'm just really actively thinking through this for myself of like what my boundaries are and how I can participate. Thank you.
So I'm going to propose a tactic for your consideration. I've tried this with some benefit, and I can't tell you it's elegant and easy and consistently ideal. Okay, so like we're just like whatever, making the road as we walk it type stuff. So this is like I have noticed over time places where I think I am more defensive, more likely to feel defeat or whatever, like whatever those negative things are that I think demobilize me in these situations. And frankly, when I've shared it with people that I've, you know, have these sort of long-term relationships with, they have sort of similar ones. I mean, not identical because we've all had our own particular childhoods and our own particular geographic locations and all those things that influence us, right? But let's just say, I mean, there's something that many of us may be vulnerable to, and it's just hard to slow it down enough to see that it's happening. So in my case, if I say, like, I think it would be great to, I don't know, whatever, form a workers' co-op to do this thing. And somebody comes across with something along the lines of like, well, that's been tried. Clearly it failed. Are you not aware of that? I mean, it's cute, but you know, I mean, get real. Okay, like if I get a version of that, okay, I go to a place of like, I am too serious and I really know what I'm talking about. And, you know, like I'm like a kid, right? Like in this defensive place where I feel like to not be taken seriously is like, I don't exist. But many years of therapy later, I can kind of figure out what that's what's going on. So the point is, I need allies in that moment to intervene where they know I'm about to go down the tubes. Because if I get enough of that ridicule, I cannot hold my ground. So it's interesting because like once I started sharing this with other people who are engaged in, you know, comparable work, I mean, if they feel safe enough, you can't just kind of like launch yourself at people with these kinds of conversations, right? You have to make a connection and have like that foundation. But typically there'll be something that they have too, if they can slow it down enough to realize it. And what we do is we make it kind of like, I've got your back pact. And the I've got your back pact is like, oh, so you don't speak English in the manner that everybody else in this group does. And people treat that as like your ideas aren't as valid, or you don't sort of understand what's going on, or you're in the wrong context or whatever. So when I hear that happening, I need to jump in to back that person who's got that particular vulnerability. Do you understand what I'm talking about here? Is this sort of going for you? Okay, thank you, Boris. Love the nodding head. Because otherwise I might go to the place of I'm saying something and nobody thinks it's got any merit. Right? So even just the head nod for me will keep me away from the like, oh, I shouldn't have done this session. It's a mistake. Nobody cares. It's really silly. Right? I got to stay out of that place. Because even if you don't nod your heads, I've got to keep with like, okay, something is probably valuable that's going on here. I'm just going to go with it. But if I discredit myself, it's over, right? Then I lead this, like, I lead my life with a kind of like, well, you probably don't think I'm serious, but I guess I'll just say it anyhow. So anyhow, that's been a tactic for me. And the more that spreads within a group, like sometimes someone will see me doing that with a buddy who I've worked this out with over a while. And they will start sometimes picking up on that and offering it to others. maybe not explicitly if they haven't really thought it through, but they might say, yeah, I mean, I just saw how like the Black woman in this group, there was just an edge to what somebody said to her, right? And I need to like intervene in a way that says, yeah, I saw that and we need to go this other way. Yeah, not easy. And I can't tell you that my skill set is adequate to the task in every moment. It is not. But it is like it has been for a means for me to not internalize the hegemonic discourse of why I shouldn't be doing what I do. Cassidy, do you have another thing to say, or perhaps your hand is there from long ago? Or maybe you're doing something else. I don't know. Anybody have a reaction to that, or
Maybe
seen something similar?
just a little comment, like regarding
Yeah.
this kind of acting on vulnerability, if you see one, and kind of try to support this acting on the vulnerability. If there is someone in the group and he or she, yeah, is kind of like when I was working in a corporate environment, and I worked in a couple of really big companies, like very bad companies, but then, like Philip Morris, for example, the cigarettes company. But then there is this culture that you are, and they tell you every day, you're as good as your last performance. So the moment you fail one performance, you're done. It's up or out. So it's very, it's very, that's some pressure that you have. And I was brought up in this way, kind of through my professional training. And then I was going to different conferences, academic conferences, and then I see also people, I'm not, English is my second language. So I struggle sometimes with it. And then I see people who have even larger issues with, for example, English, and they really struggle. And there's this initial impulse that it's brought that this presentation has to be perfect. What are you doing here? You have to be performing. And then luckily I managed to come up with a different approach, which is a bit similar to yours, is that those people have some courage to come here and speak regardless of their, vulnerability and lack of language capacity. So all I can do is try to listen to my best ability to what they have to say. So I kind of, if I understand what you say, I kind of like this strategy or little tactic. And I just wanted to say last thing, that when you said that it's cute but get real. So this kind of, when you get infuriated by lack of recognition, there's a thing I've learned today during a structuralist sociology course, which I struggle with, that violence is a lack of recognition. Yeah, there is a definition of violence that was proposed today, and I think makes sense. That if someone refuses to recognize you at the terms you propose, then it is violence being done to you, and you can rightly get affected or infuriated by it.
Yeah, that's really valuable to me. Particularly because like it holds on an interpersonal level, but it also holds on this sort of like cultural level, because like to be a proponent of a set of ideas that is deemed not to exist or be irrelevant or something like that is also, it is dramatically discrediting, if not violent. Anybody else have anything that you want to?
I
Yeah,
have to
please.
leave. I have to leave now, but because I have another meeting. But this just reminded me, because we are doing a project about artists during dictatorship. How did they kind of live through censorship and oppression? And one said there is the worst form of censorship is ignoring you. So just reminded me of this sentence. But I will hear the rest afterwards, and then thank you.
Thanks for being here and your comment.
Thank
you. Bye. Anybody else want to jump into this? Well, I kind of want to add one extra dimension to the addressing my own vulnerabilities in these contexts. And the fact that, I can't entirely like have the perspective always myself. So I need a buddy. or buddies who are we're watching each other's backs. But I think it has like some other thing that is, in my view, potentially a benefit, which is like, if I have to come in like, I know exactly what should be done here, and I have the right answer, and I have the research, and blah, 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 there is this norm created of sort of certainty, I'd call it. Like, I know the righteous path, and here I go, and we're all going to do it, and I can prove it, you know. And for the audience, I'll call it audience in the sense of those to whom I'm speaking at any given moment. So we may be a collective, and it's not, I don't mean audience in a hierarchical thing, but the listener, maybe I should say, can receive that as, oh, so the litmus test of what we do here is certainty, right? Because the mainstream, I'll talk mainstream economics, right? They come in with like, we can show you like what's going on. And we are in a more tentative position, right? We are experimenting and creating, and sometimes, you know, like going down some detours and who knows what, right? Like there is a emergent quality to what we're doing. And if we create a culture where you have to be sure, do you have the research? Do you have 20 million case studies that shows this work, right? If we put that kind of bar as like what is persuasive, then we're kind of setting ourselves up for defeat, right? Like, because the other side is always going to have more research and more spokespeople and more cultural legitimation and all of it, right? And we're going to be we are the counter hegemonic position much of our time. So I like that people who are attempting something different can kind of relax this sort of perfectionism of like, we can prove everything's going to work perfectly and what, you know what I mean? Like there's a humility to it. Like, I don't like capitalism. I'm not telling you I got the blueprint for the perfect alternative in its micro or in its macro, but I think we are emboldened to try stuff. And for me, that is what do they call it these days? A permission structure to like enable the possibility of experimentation and curiosity instead of like, I support my own emotional well-being because, hey, I've got whatever it is that deems me to be an okay person. You know, I have a PhD, so I really know, or whatever it is. I have 27 studies, so I can tell you. Like, it's something that is more like, look, you know, we are kind of outside the mainstream here, and you are not going to get mainstream approval for this. And we got to go forward anyhow. Or I want us to go forward anyway. Okay, anybody have a reaction to that? Yeah, Octavia, please.
Maybe this relates also to, I mean, I think it relates also to what Boris was saying before, even if it takes a lot of time and investment, of course, like to knowing, so I don't remember how you said that, so I noted somewhere, but knowing your enemies, right? So where, like, if you know really what economic studies, so how they are done, I mean, you can also kind of deconstruct them and saying, no, well, I mean, even if you have like hundreds or thousands of studies, of case studies, so that's not necessarily super solid, right? So that would go also a bit in that direction. But then, like, if you start deconstructing that on the norm of certainty, as you were saying, I mean, then of course you enter in the same, I mean, you kind of consolidate or reinforce this norm of uncertainty, as you were saying. And I think it's also a bit the same. And so I'm a geographer, like as many of you. And so I've often been in departments where physical geographers are also there. And so, and often in the rather natural science faculties. So look, and in Switzerland, often geography is located in the natural science faculty. So you often have to discuss with physical geographers coming and saying, yeah, but the criteria of quality and reproducibility of your research and so on. So, but it is like statistically significant and so on, right? So, and then basically, so, and then you just reply, no, but actually we don't work with the same standards. So we cannot win. And of course, as you were saying, right? I mean, if you define the quality of research with those standards, then of course we lose, and then you have like to engage with the person and saying and explain, no, look, I mean, we have different standards and so on. So I think it's very important what you say. On the other hand, like maybe it doesn't work everywhere and in every situation, and probably like the difficulty is to understand in which situations you can like try to insert this other norm, and in which other situations you kind of have to try to comply with it, because otherwise you're completely dismissed actually, right? So, and maybe this relates also, I mean, it relates a little bit but not so much, but it was just a thought that I had like about what was said also before about the sharing of vulnerabilities, and sharing really like openly about, look, okay, so my research is in this way, but I also feel in this way about my research and so on. And I think it's also like an exercise to like train yourself to show these vulnerabilities and to make them explicit also with the people you are talking to or working together and so on, but knowing how far you can go in this sharing, right? And in this showing these vulnerabilities, because in some contexts you cannot, because then you are just destroyed and you just give the other like an entry point to basically hurt you a lot. But so, and that relates to what I was saying before about like creating these kind of spaces where we train ourselves to speak openly about these vulnerabilities. And then if you start doing that with close persons of trust, then like you will kind of train yourself to know when and how you can share that. I don't know if this makes sense, but I guess it's like a continuous training also of like knowing when and how, but also of knowing how to do that in the first place, right? Because this is not something we are trained to do, right? I mean, sharing what we are sharing here, sharing about so how we feel and so on. I mean, that's not something that so we learn in our trainings, in our studies, right? So we also have to learn how to do that somehow. Yeah.
Yeah, so I really appreciate that you underline the idea that like context matters, right? I mean, you have to exercise some judgment about this. There are certainly places where this is not appropriate and won't be safe, you know, or it won't be effective or what have you. So, I mean, I just offer this, I think of it more in terms of the vulnerability part as being like more people I have some medium to long-term commitment, and we're working towards some sort of joint goal, and we face some kind of pushback that's going to be consequential for our efforts. You know, that's what I'm talking about. And I'm pretty darn selective about this. I don't, you know, I'm not into kind of like just being a puddle on the floor, or, you know, I'm not, you know, like there's got to be a way to talk about vulnerabilities that I think is like kind of like, come on, people, like, are we all swallowing like this self-presentation of I am a, you know, professional, like not even human machine that does this? Like, I just find that to be so pretentious and silly. It just, whatever. So that, like, there's got to be a language about vulnerability that is affirming, not like, oh, you poor dear, you know, you have this problem, because that's just reinforcing the, like, especially the gender part of it in my case, where it's like, oh, you know, that woman's really trying hard to be credible. Too bad for her. But something that is more like, it shows a sophistication, I think. Like when people do this that I'm not expecting, I'm like, wow, man, that's brave. And I think that's something like my second idea about like the people who we are interacting with. I think modeling that it's brave for them is important too. Because they're there because, I don't know, something's going on in their life. Maybe they're scared. They cannot see a way forward with the status quo. They have a ton of questions. They're anxious about even being curious about those questions. Like they're in all kinds of vulnerability when they show up like fresh to the meeting that's going to talk about the co-op, right? And all kinds of hegemonic forces are operating on them to say, to even go to that meeting is to show yourself, to not be like, I don't know, whatever, serious or working for a real solution or like wasting time or something, fantasizing about something. You know what I mean? Like they're showing vulnerability, just showing up. So I need to meet them where I can. Any other comments on that kind of stuff? And I'm also curious, have you seen that in the groups that you interact with? Have you seen people who like either show or you believe to be like in need of that kind of validation?
I can name myself with with the Palestine issue. I felt so alone, and I was sort of I didn't really speak to people around me about it until the students had this meeting, and actually the students were saying, if you feel sort of bad about what's happening there, it means you are right. You shouldn't feel it means you should believe in yourself and you should speak out. And these were like young people, you know, and I thought, yeah, that's true. I had this unconscious feeling of being somehow out of it, of somehow when I was against what's happening there, that it was it's very insidious. I mean, you may not even notice that you have sort of taken over the mainstream atmosphere. This is not something we speak about. So, but I'm not sure if that was.
Thanks, Cassidy, for coming.
I'm not sure if that was the what you meant. Probably you meant something else.
I don't know what I meant. I'm exploring, right?
Yeah.
Oh, did someone else? Please, Octavia, please.
Yeah, I want to say, I mean, I think that I don't know if this replies to your question actually, but just something that I was thinking about. So I think that what you said about modeling, I mean, resonates a lot. Like, and especially depending, of course, on your hierarchic position, right? Because of course, if you're a professor or if you're a postdoc or if you're a PhD, like it changes a lot, right? This modeling, of course, because as a PhD, like a junior PhD, if you start sharing your vulnerabilities, you just feel like I'm the little one who cannot deal with the stuff, and so whereas if the professor, like in a group, for instance, so gives like this model of sharing the vulnerabilities and so on, and also asking for support, actually, as you were saying, right? I mean, if in a context you observe that I'm in this situation, so I ask for your support and so on. So I think it's a different kind of modeling and probably like more effective somehow, but just like as a personal experience. So in the last times, so I try to be more open about my vulnerabilities and also how I feel about some stuff going on within my research group. And I have really noticed so how this opens really spaces for others also to share, right? But if nobody starts, so then nothing happens, right? But so as soon as somebody starts, and especially if this somebody is maybe not a super junior one, but it's like a more senior person in the group, I mean, this can really like open a lot of space actually, and a lot of possibilities for people who need that sharing and that support also to share.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really nice. When someone who has whatever it is, cultural capital of some sort in a situation, that can really challenge the hierarchical notions that might be there in the group. Boris, go ahead.
I was thinking about the research participants or the people who come to participate in your projects or in our projects, how it may affect them. I didn't have this example. I have kind of an opposite example, but I thought maybe it could be interesting. So, like the research participants tried to protect me, which was surprising for me. Because I decided to research a conflict between we had the right-wing central government and municipal governments about managing municipal water. And there was some very intense conflict between them, and I wanted to talk to everyone involved. That was my idea. And then write a sort of a summary of this conflict. And I was interviewing municipal water companies and mayors. And some of them started telling me, but just don't write something that can hurt you, or I will tell you off the record version, on the record version. And they were giving examples of people who were prosecuted by the state, who engaged in opposition. I don't know whether it was gossip or not. There were some issues where it was really nasty, but when I was doing this, I thought, no way, like I'm going to write about this right-wing party, which happens to be in the government. But then, so anyway, they had the better sense than myself, where to venture, where not to venture. So when I came back after fieldwork and tried to write down, I was like, okay, so what do I do? Where do I take it now? And so that was the case, which can happen the other way. And I wanted to ask a question, if I may, about value-driven research. Value-driven research, because in our fields, I would say, or the geography, we often speak about positionality and the role of position, how positionality plays into what we research, and how our values affect what we research. And then I was thinking, okay, I'll try to do something about this. So I just make it explicit. I'll try to be critical of my own positionality and include it in the paper. And it triggers everyone. This position that I researched the conflict between the central government and local governments. And my initial position, which I cannot, let go, is that I support local governments. So I make it public, my position. I do critical and, kind of a Gadamerian hermeneutical exercise of being critical and put it in. And everyone is critical about it. So I had to cut it out as per reviewers' requests. And one sociologist told me, geographers are so preoccupied with this thing of positionality, and they do not achieve much, but at least they're thought-provoking. So that's the compliment I got here in France. But anyway, I wanted to ask you whether you make it explicit, or maybe you just write what you think it's worth writing, and you have this, as everyone has, a sort of subjective position. And you just don't spell it out. I don't know. So I wanted to ask, how do you go about this? If you go about this.
Well, I have a bunch of thoughts, but I'm going to ask, does anybody else have stuff to say on that?
Sorry, I don't want
Please.
to monopolize too much. So if I talk too much, just it's okay. No, that I can relate a lot, Boris, because also now in economic geography there is this idea of the normative turn. I don't know if you have read some stuff about that. So, and it's acknowledging or saying that the economic geography should engage with societal challenges and really be normative about, okay, we should solve climate change, blah, 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 and so on. And I mean, I don't know, for me, it's crazy because it has always been normative somehow, right? And so, but now also when you say value-driven research, I mean, it's always value-driven and it's always normative, right? So, and it just like making that explicit, so through reflexivity and, I mean, reflexivity and positionality and so on. I mean, yeah, and because one specific bunch of people is doing that, it's making that explicit. So it seems that only these people have these values, right, and are normative. So and that's the whole issue. And then how? So I don't have answers on that. So how to make the norms and values and normativity of the ones who don't recognize them explicit and visible, right? Yeah.
I have a lot of reactions to this. The pretense that we weren't always positioned or had normative influences is mind-blowing to me. Like, I mean, Boris, you did econ. I mean, like, it's like gobsmacking, sort of, like, so I won't even do it. So, okay, so, and then if I identify the consciously known aspects of my position, which aren't all of them naturally, and everybody else positions themselves as like, I'm just an objective scientist doing my neutral stuff, like, then I am already, like, in hegemonic discourse, this is basically saying, you're not credible and everybody else is, right? So I don't start like that. I mean, I'm not saying it's not important for my own reflection, but I question whether it becomes like a formulaic thing that we are going to do without being quite careful about the context in which we do it. And I will do it in some contexts, but I just won't do it in front of, like, the World Bank, right? I mean, yeah. Anything else about that? Like that whole, like, how you self-identify, and it does connect very much into the vulnerability conversation, frankly. I want to offer something about, like, I'm thinking about audiences of, like, workers' co-ops and what have. Oh, Emily, you've got something. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I've been dealing with this lately because I'm applying for grants for my dissertation research right now, and I'm applying to a lot of grants where, like, positionality statement is not something that they would expect or acknowledge, but I'm also a white person applying to do work in the Bahamas. And so I don't feel comfortable, like, not mentioning that part of my positionality. So I've actually been trying to work it into my methodological approach. So when I talk about my methodological approach, I sneak in stuff about my positionality, and in justifying my methodology of having participant-driven questions and a participant-driven ethic. So that's kind of the way I've been dealing with it in that specific context. But it doesn't work in all circumstances, but I've been trying to kind of do that when I'm seeking grants, to say, I'm using this participant-driven research because of this, and then kind of sneaking in stuff about my positionality that way, but that doesn't work obviously in all contexts.
Sure. I mean, what the Ford Foundation wants and what might work if you're, supporting the development of your workers' co-op is, like, completely different. So, we need different languages for different settings. I can't believe some of the stuff I say on grant applications. It's, like, outrageous, but there you go. Like, it's like, I don't feel accountable to, funding agencies. I feel like they need a reason to give me money. I give them the reason. But I do feel accountable to people with whom I'm trying to build alternatives. And if I happen to have the capacity to get a grant to make that work, yay. Otavia, you had something?
Yeah, it was more an intervention, like a practical intervention, because I'm seeing the time that, so we have like about 20 minutes. And I don't know, maybe in some way I also feel a bit bad because when Emily at the beginning you were speaking about like the US elections, and then my intervention was okay, but it's not only about the US elections. And then I just realized that maybe, so I just wanted to say that if we want to use the rest of the time like to discuss about that and how we feel about that, and if you feel that it's important to do that here and to exchange about that specific thing, which is of course not the only thing happening, bad thing happening, but it's a big bad thing that happened. So we can also, yeah, take the rest of the time for that. But I mean, I don't want to like, I just say bypass the facilitation by Ellen, but just like acknowledge this and offer the possibility.
I mean, I'm up for that. It's really whatever people feel is most useful to them. And Emily, you did mention that. So, Nadia, do you want to jump
I
in?
just wanted, before we get on to Trump, just one last comment to what Boris was saying about positionality, and Ellen about how it's very interesting. It really discredits you in the eyes of the objective scientists, so you don't really put it in. I just wanted to say a small aside. It seems that our department is divided along the lines of asking students in their thesis, master's thesis, for example, to say, to use the passive sense, like it has been done, this has been done in my research, and I and some other people then again ask them to say, I did this, I did this, I decided on this methodology. And it's so funny because it's really not expressed often by the colleagues who ask for the passive tense. It's not expressed out loud, but somehow there's a fault line among us who assume the positivist philosophy versus this sort of more, I don't know, more, how to say it, post-structural maybe approach. So it's really very interesting to me to hear that the same, and the struggle again about positionality there's going on in other aspects as well. So I just wanted to say sort of this funny thing that's happening, that it's somehow there, but it's not really, we never speak about it with my colleagues, we just pretend it's not there. It's just that the students say, but we've been told that, but I tell you that you should do it like this. So they don't know. So it's very interesting how some things aren't brought out into the open, but still they happen, and they reflect in students' thesis. So just a small aside, and thank you for all these comments. I haven't spoken that much, but all you've said is it's very interesting. It makes conscious some things which one knew but didn't really reflect. So thanks.
Emily, I feel like you had something that you wanted to chip in with there. Oh no, I missed it. Boris, go ahead.
Just one last thing, and we can move to Trump if you want. So yes, the language thing. I also got one comment from my faculty about like, don't write in first person, write in third person. But I'm just going to ignore it. But what I did, like what the first paper when my positionality was so explicit, it was really bashed. In the second paper, what I did, I wrote that I wanted to develop a theory, and theory for me is just a useful proposition for someone. It has to be for someone. And I just wrote explicit, it is for my research participants who live in those villages. So, and I developed theory for them. And they made peace with it, they somehow survived, at least in my faculty. So maybe this is the way, just to be less explicit. And as you say, Emily, just to include it into your methodology and just go with it, and do this exercise for yourself, but keep it to your heart. I know. Yeah.
Use a different language, like somebody else said before.
Okay, so I would like to offer one little tidbit, and then we can go to Trump if that's our preference. So my tidbit is this. Like in terms of the people who you are engaging with in various alternative economic spaces, I have noticed that there is like kind of a speech habit, which is something like you're in that public meeting and someone says, well, I'm no expert, but I think la la la, right? Or like the initial phrase is like, I'm not sure I have the authority to speak. And then maybe they get out a question or a comment, okay? And it's even worse if you are the PhD or whatever it is, you know, the professor or something like that. You go into those spaces and then it's like, well, I'm not an economist, but I think la la. Okay? So that's your signal. Like that is someone who is wrestling with the vulnerability of like, do I have the right to have an idea or a question, right? So like, I would say like, I'm trained now to listen to the phrases and to try and be their ally in the places where they feel discredited or preemptively discredit themselves. And it's super interesting what happens. Because sometimes I have to ridicule myself to do it. Like when someone says, oh, I'm not an economist, but I was wondering, and I might say, well, I am an economist and it almost wrecked my ability to think. But I'm wondering too, la, 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 okay? So now we have like an economist is not some exalted being. I kind of think a lot of what I learned was crap. So, you know, I try and make it playful. I try and not and sometimes it falls flat, but sometimes it does create a thing where, okay, I'm not going to be judging people because they don't say things in academic language or whatever. That's my tidbit. Okay, do we want more Trumpy or whatever? For those people in the United States, is there anything you want from the rest of us who are not, let's see.
Am I the only one?
Guy?
Am I the only one?
I think
it is just me. Which,
yeah.
I just want to thank you all though for having this space because, I've had a really hard time working this week. So like this Liviana is one way that I feel like I can at least tune in and engage in some capacity because I can't write. I can't. But I am interested, you know, because like I said, it surprised me and I'm wondering but it didn't seem to surprise people in other places of the world as much as it surprised me that he won. Like when I was I was at the Royal Geographical Society and pretty much all the British people I interacted with were like, well, you're getting another Trump presidency. And I was like, no, I don't think so. And they turned out to be right and I was wrong. So yeah, I would be interested to hear anyone's perceptions, particularly if you have ideas about how, I don't know. It's hard for me to form any sort of coherence surrounding it right now because I think we're all still in a little bit of trauma and will continue to be. And I'm certainly not even, one of the things I'm struggling is recognize that I'm going to be okay, most likely, but a lot of people I love may not be. And people in Gaza may not be, and people in the Ukraine may not be. And so that's kind of what is a big struggle right now. So if anyone has any, perceptions from outside the United States, I think I would welcome them, but I also don't, if other, I don't want to make it, since I'm the only one for the United States, we can also talk about something else if others, anyway.
Well, I can say I didn't expect him to win either. And I feel it's a catastrophe. And I try not to think about it.
I don't know what, like, it's brutal. I don't know what else to say. This is just brutal. And it's true. Gathering with people like you folks is like something that helps me go to the bleakest possible interpretation of all of this. Yeah. So, I mean, I could give you whatever political analysis in a minute, but it's just hard. Like it is just hard. And I think like this conversation about vulnerability is like, this is writ large for so many people who are now going to be at the edge of their seat wondering, what is coming down the train tracks headed to us, you know?
Yeah.
So I got no like gift wrap to put on this. Like they're
Yeah.
just
Nobody does,
other
and I
than-
think
yeah,
yeah, I think
Yeah.
one of the challenges is my mechanism for dealing with anxiety and fear has always been to like rationally question my fear and my anxiety. And what do you do when you feel like your fears and anxiety actually are very rational? You know, that
Yeah.
makes it's like if I'm having irrational fears, I can deal with those. But the fears I think we're all having globally are pretty rational. And yeah, I think just having a togetherness space helps. So thank you all for that. And yeah. Nobody has a magic thing that you can say to anybody to make it better, right?
You know, one thing I wonder about, Tivy, do you want to say something? Please do.
No, just like that. I think that, I mean, as we were saying before, of course, it's not the, I mean, it's not a new thing, and it's not one only like thing, but it's all being part of like yes, we were saying before, like the difficulties of speaking about Palestine and so on, but it just makes things worse somehow, also because of the like how do you say that, like of the popular legitimacy that these discourses now take somehow, because so he got more votes than before, and because it's a clear victory. So, and it kind of gives like a solid legitimacy actually to like discourses that like discredit people, and that, yeah, just that are very violent somehow. And then I guess so the whole discussion we had was about like knowing in which context you can show your vulnerabilities, or in which context you should use which language, etc. I mean, this event probably reduces the context where this is possible somehow, right? I mean, for you in the US, of course, much more, but probably also in other parts of the world, right? Where like this backlash and reactionary narratives and so on are also but somehow they are reinforced now by the by the by the result, right? So, and that's something that is very worrying somehow. It's also not an answer, but it's just like that these spaces where we were talking about probably are like reduced, and so we have to be even more careful, and you even more, like in the United States, right? So where you can speak about your positionality. So in the grant proposal, I mean, maybe that's not about the grant proposal, but it's about like other discussions outside, right? So yeah, that's worrying. Sorry, like I don't have
Yeah.
an answer.
And I think, talking about the legitimacy, I think one thing that worries me as a hopefully future educator, I want to continue in academia is, I think I naively, after 2016, thought that some of these problems were going to age out because it seemed to be a lot of older white people who were continuing this discourse. And what we saw with this election is the radicalization of young white people. And that's, to me, that's, I think, what scares me the most, is that we have now kind of these alt-right youth who are being empowered by this discourse. And I mean, I don't know if it wasn't a final number, but at one point I saw that 53% of white Gen Z went for Trump. And so that to me those are the kind of things that, as we think about how do we deal with this as educators? Yeah.
Yeah. So Boris, why don't you take the last comment? We're going to need to wrap it up soonish.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I have no consolation, obviously. I'm sorry. But what bothers me is that, like, from my privileged position, because I'm, cisgender white male in European countries, so I'm super comfortable. And even if we have right-wing government for a while, it doesn't affect me personally too much. Sometimes it does, but it does. Yet, I was wondering why, like that, at least and I don't think that there is in the public discourse, the understanding of the support for the right wing, or for Trump, or for our right-wing elements, whatnot, why people do vote. And this bugs me, that that we cannot overcome these divides, because in Poland we're 50-50 divided, in US it's 50-50 pretty much, and that we don't have this understanding. And from my experience from working for Philip Morris and Marlboro marketing, is that good people do Marlboro marketing, you know? And I don't understand that, but they do it. And so I don't know. So that's my main word. Maybe I should read Arendt, The Banality of Evil. Maybe there are some tips to that, but I don't know. So on that note, I pass to Helen.
I kind of want to offer that. Have any of you seen a television program called West Wing? It was a US television program, like, well, anyhow, it's basically about the White House. And what I took from that television show was like, oh, you know, politics is controversial and difficult, and, you know, like there's conflict and whatever. But there's like some kind of benevolent force in the White House that ultimately comes up with something that's sort of reasonable, and, you know, we make incremental progress and it's all good. Anyhow, that was my introduction to US politics, was that television show, which had this like kind of aspirational, like, this will work out, you know, because good people will finally come to something reasonable. And one of the things that I like about this moment is that that West Wingification, if that works for you, is so obviously not there. Oh, did it? The whole class came? Yeah, of course they did. So, like, if you have this sort of prettified idea that, you know, we're all kind of getting there, it's going to be a bit bumpy, but it's fine. It's really hard to maintain that in the middle of like a year from now. And there will be a number of people who get disillusioned by that and are looking for something. And to me, that's our opportunity, right? Is to like deal with the like awfulness of the situation by saying like, these people are not your friends. Like, this is not gonna, like, that strong man over there is not really got your interests at heart, and you want to come talk to us because like we're searching for something else. So I don't know. That's not really much. There's nothing I can say that is going to make this less devastating. Believe me. But I mean, unless we are just gonna, if we need to have, I need some way to keep going. So that's how my way.
Well, can I just say sorry, just a small maybe word of consolation, which I'm not sure isn't a consolation, looking at it all from Central Europe and not following politics that closely, but my impression during the first Trump regime was that there is also a very strong democratic undergrowth in the United States, so with the municipalities, for example, going against Trump, the courts going in some ways against Trump. And I also have confidence there is this other part of the United States, which in those 4 years, it seemed to me, as I say, I see it from the outside, were in many ways sort of counteracting his crazy policies. So it's there's the other half anyway, and there's a tradition in the United States which I feel which can fight back. So that's my impression again from the outside.
I hope you're
Well,
right.
that's what we got for you.
Well, thank you for giving a little
Yeah,
space for this. I appreciate it. It's been
Oh, it's not just you. It's really consequential. It's really consequential for everybody.
yeah.
So yeah, it's I mean, it's a special kind of horrifying when it's your neighbors who voted for this.
Yeah.
But we're all kind of,
Yeah. And I will tell you that there are, like, Gavin Newsom is already having a call today for how to deal with this. Like, those democratic systems, the blue states are coming in to figure out what can we do for the people in the red states. And so I do think there's people mobilizing already. So if that gives any of you some comfort as well, because you may not see that as much from abroad.
Yeah, thank you for that. So look, we're almost done our time. I want to say that, like, I'm totally open to continuing this conversation in whatever form. I find it fascinating. And it's always like a pleasure to me to like get out of the place where I have to perform out there as an academic or what have you, and go to this kind of space. So like, thanks a lot for joining in. Reach out to me if that would make sense to you. I don't know if did they make it possible for us to find each other again? I don't know. Octavia, is there a way for that, or more just on the CERN list, I guess?